Sure.
and that type of thing. Or you can invest in another business or of that type of issue.
Mm.
And there's been major studies done on this in the last few years, and it's shown it conclusively. And yet the United Nations is advancing a program of sustainable development that takes private property rights away and puts them in the hands of government officials.
Well, that's right. It's a more socialistic type of system that is developed globally, and especially when you say there, I mean, the seizure, so to speak, of the land. That's a classic socialistic agenda, right?
Yes, it is, very much so. It's very, very socialistic in that standpoint. Of course, as I understand it, in Sweden, you have a fairly socialistic economy. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, it's going up and down and a little bit back and forth on the blue and red, playing board, as it were. But it is very socialistic if we were to compare to the United States, I think. Yes.
Yeah, well, we're rapidly moving in that same direction.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask you about, and I don't know if you've come across this in regards to the research. But one thing that is also worrisome in regards to the food production is, of course, the genetically modified crops and so forth, and how this also, we could talk about the Terminator seed technology, for instance, that is, very much connected with this. Do you see this also as a kind of a very alarming developing trend?
Very, very alarming. The terminating seed of Monsanto is, I think, one of the greatest threats to mankind that we have going right now. When you allow a company to control whether or not you can improve corn, for instance, or wheat's more important than rice. Those are the two staples of the world right now. When you have control over what can happen with those genetically, you've basically taken out of the hands of the average person the ability to improve, increase their crop production and so forth, and put it in the hands of a private corporation. And this is, I think, very alarming because it gives Monsanto tremendous power. When they have a genetically available seed that is really good for an area and they control it, you cannot use it to go past one generation. You basically depend upon Monsanto for your source of food, to feed your people and so forth.
Yeah.
That makes you very vulnerable to Monsanto or whatever corporation controls or owns the genetic patent on that particular process.
It's incredible that
as far as genetic improvement is concerned, where you're just crossbreeding and so forth, that's been done for generations, thousands of years,
sure.
and really we should continue to use that, and even genetic engineering to a point. But when you start having corporations own a gene pattern, you have a problem.
Very large, and again, this could potentially develop into something really nasty because the diversity also of every seed is going down, and it's more kind of monocultures everywhere. And if something were to hit, like a small plague or some kind of insects that is attacking or parasite, it could knock out entire what do you call it? Even a country's food supply, basically.
It can, and we have had, for instance, corn in the United States. There was a certain gene type back, I think it was about 20 years ago, that was very, very good, and something like 60% of the farmers were planting that particular variety of corn. And all of a sudden, something that had never been a problem before became a major problem and wiped them all out. It can happen. It's been demonstrated that it has happened.
Yeah. So, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about, if we could squeeze this in here. I think it was you, wasn't it, that mentioned in one of the versions there of Alex Jones' Endgame movie about the United Nations and the law of the sea treaty, or LOST, right?
Yes, that's correct. I don't mention it a lot. I'm not an expert, as some people are, but I do know enough about LOST to realize that if you give control over the seas to an international body that's not accountable to any nation, they basically can control your form of commerce, your development rights of any resources in the seas, gold, precious metals, aquatic plant life or fish life or whatever. You're basically giving that institution the ability to control what you can and cannot do in the oceans. And that's been coming up several times for ratification in the United States, and it's always been turned down because we lose so much in the process, and yet the Bush administration that we have right now is pushing it really hard to get it ratified. And I don't understand why, unless they want to push everything up to an international level so that they can have what's called global governance.
That's right. Feels like it's an age-old agenda, so to speak. Controlling the planet as one body, or as one, government or whatever. And it seems to be, again, it goes back into history. We can tie it very far back. So the question is, are these people ever going to rest? They're going to, as you say, they're constantly bringing up the same, legislation or some kind of ratification of a document or whatever, and it's a continuous battle, and this potentially might not go away, so to speak.
Well, that's very true, because they're putting literally billions and billions of dollars into this agenda, and if they lose on one front, they'll let it set for a couple of years and come back, call it something else, and try to do it again. This has been the history of this for at least 30 years that I've been involved, even peripherally, and I'm sure if you go back to the turn of the 20th century, you'll find the same thing. They're trying to advance an effort called, what they call now global governance. They called it world government back in those days, or world order, you name it. There's all kinds of names for it.
Sure.
But it's called global governance today, and it basically takes the decision-making power away from the people and puts them in the hands of a few small elite at the international level.
Yeah, exactly. That seems to be the case. Do you have personally, any ideas, so to speak, of who might be behind the agenda of either, if we talk about global warming or depopulation or GMO or whatever? Maybe not so much the people who advocate this in the public eye, because at least to what I've come to the conclusion, they are kind of put there as puppets, so to speak. But do you have any idea of who the people potentially might be behind the scenes that are?
My mind, when I began to investigate this back in the early 1990s, that is centered in the financial community of the world, primarily the banking system of Great Britain and the United States. I've come to call it what's known as the Anglo-American faction. There's 5 major power factions in the world today, and the Anglo-American faction has been at it the longest, as near as I can tell, and probably has the greatest amount of power. And they basically, if you look at the history of wars in Europe and the United States and so forth, these group of people fund both sides of every war, and they profit by it at the expense of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of men and women being slaughtered in the war process. It's diabolical what they have done in this process.
Oh yeah, yep, exactly. And it feels like this is something also, as I said, that is kind of ongoing, and it seems to be more, when I look at it, almost like a philosophy also for them in a sense, because to a certain degree the money seems to be okay. It drives people on a lower level, I guess, but when you get far enough up on top, it feels like that these people have enough money to spend in 1,000 lifetimes. It feels like money isn't the main driving force here. What do you think?
It's not. In fact, there's been a lot of people that have said in the past, and I agree with them, that power is the absolute aphrodisiac at the end. If you have all the money you never will need, it's not money that's important anymore. It's power. Power, or money buys power, and that's why it's important. But once you have power, that's what you really will feed on. I don't know it's a human characteristic, or at least in some people it is, that they have to have absolute power. Lord Acton once said that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah. And I agree with that. The more power you have, the more you're liable to abuse that power that you have.
That's right. Hey, I want to return a little bit and talk more about how popular, so to speak, the agenda of global warming has become now. And one thing I guess that ties into this is the fact that Al Gore, together with the IPCC, actually got the Nobel Prize last year, and he also got an Oscar. What do you think about this?
Well, it shows you that these particular entities are political in their nature. They're politically correct, and I am convinced, but I don't have any proof for it, that they're probably being heavily influenced by the global agenda, what I call the global agenda, to create a new world government or global governance, as they like to call it. That this is the thrust that they're having. They're associating with people that are constantly putting ideas in their heads that this is a good thing and that type of thing. And so when Al Gore comes out with the inconvenient truth and is basically supported by the IPCC, you have to ask yourself, how in the world could the Nobel Peace Prize be awarded to Al Gore and the IPCC? They have nothing to do with peace. And yet it has been so bent and so twisted that they received the Peace Prize and gave them a tremendous amount of credibility in the process.
That's right. Do you think the Nobel movement, so to speak, or organization that is headquartered here in Sweden, that they are in on it, or do you think that they are basically fooled, or they want to kind of show their good side, so to speak, and be in on the whole global warming agenda thing now?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for it. My experience has been that most of the people that are advancing this agenda have no idea what they're doing. It's a politically correct thing. They are predisposed to do it because that's the way they think, and very often they just advance this agenda without even realizing they're advancing it. Whether or not the Nobel Peace Prize is involved in that directly or indirectly, I don't really know. I mean, these are very influential people. They rub elbows with people that there are directly involved in it without any question. And whether or not they know much more about it or not, I just can't say.
Yeah, probably it's an open question so far until we get some more evidence for it. That will, well, then we have to deal with that when that comes. But anyway, I want to squeeze in a few, one more question here, or one more comment before we begin to round things up here. And as we've been talking about here, it seems to be the elite or the agenda. They use kind of any means necessary to achieve their goals, so to speak. And what I want to ask you about is the potential use of weather manipulation when we're talking about global warming, because there are some research out there that is pointing towards the fact that man now actually is capable of manipulating the weather. Do you think that this is something that there could or actually already have been using?
I think it's very, very possible. Again, I'm not a physicist, so I don't know the mathematics behind it, but I have read enough about this particular issue where the HARP technology and so forth that is being used in the United States, Russia, and Europe can actually modify the ionosphere. Now, the ionosphere is critically important because that's the interaction area between the sun and planet Earth. That's where you're going to see the reduction in cosmic radiation and so forth. And if they start messing around with the ionosphere and changing that, they could very well start to modify not only the jet stream, but because the jet stream is so important to climate in every nation in the world, the climate that goes along with it. So, yes, I think that they really do believe that they can modify the weather in a way, or the climate in a way, that is going to either be beneficial to a nation or detrimental. In fact, both the United States and Russia have done a lot of this research as a mechanism to determine whether it's a viable weapon or not.
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right. And it feels like, if they potentially then could go to the extent that they actually are trying to create almost like a doomsday scenario here with and they're going to blame it on global warming all along, or CO2 or whatever,
Whatever. I know, and it's very alarming from the standpoint that if they can do this, and, again, I'm not a physicist, so you have to really understand that I'm going on the basis of what other writers have said that are physicists, and the fact that I know, based on my meteorological background, that the ionosphere is extremely important in weather modification. And if they can modify the ionosphere, they can modify weather, and they could potentially use it as a weapon.
You're right. Do you see, any kind of way to tackle an issue like that, or combat it in some kind of, way?
Well, the only way is to be totally transparent, but how do you get transparency? The United Nations has said that for 10 years they've been working on transparency. If nothing, they have become more secretive, not more transparent. And the same thing with our federal government, and probably the same thing with the various governments in Europe, as they're more transparent in some areas, but in other areas they are totally secret. And to say that they are being transparent in this particular research effort and so forth, I think you have to take it on face value, and how can you trust a government that's doing what it's doing if, in fact, it's doing what we think it's doing? The fact that we're even talking about it is very alarming, because we can't trust our governments.
That's right, and we're also saying here, I guess, in a way that